Hey, it's Matt Pinfield. Welcome to In a Lonely Place. I'm very, very excited about our guest tonight because all I can say is I've been such a massive fan of his band since the early 1990s. Big fan of everything he's done, really, for almost 30 years. The different projects and collectives he's been in, all his own projects, and also all his incredible production. So I was thinking to myself, who would I love to have on the show? And the name that came to mind was Ken Andrews. So, Ken, welcome to the show. Good to see you, man. How are you?
Good to see you, Matt.
You know,
You're looking great.
yeah, thanks, Ken. We're working on it. It's been a crazy couple of years, after being hit by a car and surviving that, which was an incredible miracle. But I got very positive, thoughts because I'm getting through and fighting through all the insanity with the COVID, and you and I both have families and children, and just the important thing is we're just all out here staying strong for our loved ones. You know what I mean, and doing what we
Absolutely. Yeah.
and focusing on the things that we love the most, which are music. The things that are the most important to us. So, it's been pretty crazy times, right? I mean, how's the homeschooling thing going with the kids, Ken? Because I know that my daughters are both older now. You know what I mean?
hmm
They're both, one's college age, one's in college, so she's doing homeschooling, for college, and the other one is already, out of college. But how is that going for, kids, elementary school?
It's I'm taking it day by day. I mean, it's been changing a lot. We've been trying different methodologies, and I'm just ultimately I'm thankful that my kids are both pretty tech savvy at this point. So they seem to be able to get around and get logged in and do their thing. But it hasn't been without some issues for sure. I
Yeah, yeah.
mean, and mostly technical, just trying to get all those kids logged in at the same time. It's a new world.
Yeah. Excuse me. Woo.
Bless you.
All right, thank you. So Ken, I want to kind of go back through your history because you've got so many fans who love Failure and love different projects you've been in, and they really admire your production. But I
Mhm.
want to talk about your history. So I know you were born in Seattle, Washington, and but how long did you live there? And I know you've been in the LA area for many a year, but what was your
Mhm.
childhood like? Did you grow up in your early years, those formidable years? Were they in the Seattle area? What was it like?
I moved to Southern California, well, specifically to San Diego when I was 13,
Yeah,
right in the middle of, just really getting into rock albums as a kid. I was probably really into rock albums more like not starting around 9, 10, and
yeah,
just was like, just a listener and, just really into it. And, avid, like I would listen to my favorite records like way too many times. Um, but all of that kind of like I think was just like it was like data being entered into my soul or my head
yeah,
or something.
yeah,
And when I finally was like one day I was kind of like, I want to try to play guitar. um I had all of that, in there. So yeah, I was thinking about those records, and especially the records that had guitar that kind of made my ears prick up, like, whoa, what's that, like, how is that being done? Those are the records that really stuck with me.
And what was that like? I mean, were you listening to the radio in San Diego too? Things like 91X and the other rock stations. Is that where you were discovering music as a kid?
Yeah, and also on the radio in Seattle before I moved, and also just like the junior high I was in up in Seattle, a lot of the kids were into hard rock, Van Halen, AC/DC, and stuff like that. So I got you know I got interested in albums then and started finding things that were a little more off the path. Um, Probably more when I moved to San Diego. Yeah. And that's when new wave was kind of becoming more dominant, at least on radio too.
Yeah, I mean, it was an exciting time. I mean, it was time for a breath of fresh air. There's no question about it.
Hmm.
Um, in that period of the late 1970s, because like in the around 77, 76, 78, there was mainstream radio around the country was playing the same five albums like Book of Dreams, Steve Miller Band, Boston, Frampton Comes Alive, Fleetwood Mac Rumors, and Asia, and that was it. Like I mean, in parts of the country.
Yeah.
But there were pockets, places like San Diego or LAR in Long Island or K Rock that were, embracing the new music that was out there, which was a really cool thing. And of course,
Hmm.
me, I was, a high school kid, and then there was college radio. So it was so exciting to be, playing those new bands at that period of time. But how old were you when you actually picked up your first guitar and started learning how to play?
Like 17 and a half, like, yeah, right around winter, way back when.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was right before I graduated high school.
that's amazing.
And my brother was already a really good guitar player, so I had an in there in terms of getting some free instruction.
Yeah.
So just and he sort of showed me some basics. Um, and then, it's just like for me, I think I was one of those kids who just gravitated towards listening to records, stopping the record, putting the needle up, okay, and then putting it back down, just kind of piecing together what the puzzle pieces are for rock music, basically.
And that's great. So, well, when you ended up coming up with the concept for Failure, well, maybe I should wait a minute. Were there bands that you had previous to Failure that you had started during those early years?
Nothing that really did anything. There was a few efforts at um, playing covers in like barns and stuff like that in North County.
Yeah.
But not like it never really manifested into like a gigging band. But one of the friends I met down there in that scene ended up being the first drummer in Failure.
Yeah.
I moved to LA first, and then he came up like a year or two later, and I was going to Cal State LA, and he was going to LACC.
And you were studying film as well, weren't you, at that period?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which
Yep.
explains your film background. I mean, I know, like, years later you did some editing on like Prison Sex, the Tool video, and, worked on things like, Stuck on You video, which was breathtaking. It was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So you use those skills that you, went to school with. So, but you met the original drummer, and then where did you meet Greg? Was that like literally?
Well, I was kind of chipping away at some, like, I thought they were really rough experimental demos. And Robert, the first drummer, he was like, yeah, this is kind of cool. And he made some suggestions. And then he was like, I think we should do a band. Let's look for at least a third, maybe a fourth member. I mean, I don't know if he wanted to have four. I can't remember. But I was like, okay, great. How do we do that? And it was like, at that time, it was like the Recycler and Music Connection.
Yeah. Those
That
were
was
the
it.
two ways to find people.
Yes.
Los Angeles, yes.
Yes. So, but the thing of it is from the day that we first actually put an ad up to when Greg called, I think was like 14 or 15 months.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't something where we were just like, we got to make this happen. We did get a few calls maybe every month or two, but we could just tell them by the phone calls it wasn't going to work out with pretty much everyone. The only person I think we felt like we had a chance to identify with was Greg, and I believe he was the first person that we ever got in a room with.
Yeah.
And actually played together.
Do you know what was in that ad? I mean, how did you describe yourself?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure, like, I know The Cure was in there, and Bauhaus might have been in there too.
Yeah.
And I think there was either a band that had fretless bass, or maybe we even just said Mick Karn.
Yeah, who was great.
It was awesome. But
And
this was like this was kind of like our intellectual kind of concept for the band before Greg even joined was, yeah, let's do a rock trio, but with fretless bass, but
yeah,
really distorted guitar. And so and we did that for the whole first album and the first maybe 2 years of the band, and then we kind of just abandoned that sound. I think by the time we were finished recording Comfort, we were kind of like, are we really executing? Is the part you're playing really have to be on fretless? And a lot of times the answer was no.
yeah. But at
So
the beginning, it sounded that way because you liked obviously Mick Karn, Japan, and those bands that were so much stuff going on then, right? I mean,
there was, and I think maybe it was that we saturated ourselves with that maybe a little too much when we were listening to it, and so maybe we just kind of got a little bored of it. I'm not really sure, but the funny thing is, cut to whatever 20 something years later, we were just literally the same band, or just doing a jam. Well, sorry, we have a different drummer now, Kelly. We're just doing some jam writing, and Greg walked in with the fretless bass. And it was awesome. It was so cool. He's playing it totally different now. Way more interesting. It was really interesting. Yeah.
yeah. But I think that's great. So, tell me how the deal came down with Slash Records because you guys were a different. For me, when Comfort came out, I saw that I felt that Slash was taking different chances and going in different directions. I mean, I obviously love the label for the people like X and the Gun Club and so many other people they had over the years. But when they signed the band, I was like, wow, this is really cool. And so tell me how that came down.
Well, that was Randy Kay. To see the band, I think at Al's Bar,
Yeah.
which then was called something else for a while, and then I don't think it's a venue anymore. But it was either Al's. I don't remember. It was one of those really tiny bars that were booking local bands,
Yeah.
and you didn't have to pay to play, and they were dives, and it was awesome.
Yeah, because the pay to play thing was just criminal, typical bullshit. And finally, eventually, the area got called out on it. But I mean, it was rampant at that period of time. But
Yeah,
but it's cool.
yeah.
But go ahead. I was going to say,
Yeah, that I mean, there was a real division geographically at that time, where the Sunset Strip with the Whiskey and the Roxy and whatever else was going up, the Rainbow, or I don't know, that whole scene was like very by the numbers and very corporate and sort of calculated. And at that point, the bands that were playing there were incredibly similar to each other. I mean, like, it was very hard to tell some of them apart. It had become like a uniform that you would wear if you were part of that scene. And for us, I think we really didn't like that, and we thought it was funny. So I think that's why we named the band Failure. And we even said it. I think we said the name in the ad for Greg. I can't even remember, but no, maybe it was just our goal at the time. One of our goals was to actually play shows under the band name Failure and have those guys, the kind of hair metal strip guys, look at that and go, who the hell would call themselves Failure? that was like our inspiration.
yeah,
That was it.
that's great where that came from. I mean, yeah, I can imagine what a division of what was happening there. And you're right. And I think at that point too, you were on like the third and fourth tier hair metal bands. So it was like, the ones that had,
Yeah, they were so right. It was so ripe for being satirized and messed with. And so you had this and it was a sort of nicer part of town, the West Hollywood. And then you had like the divey, dirty part of Hollywood where you were having these much smaller shows, 150 people, and it looked packed, you know. But the music that was actually going on was cool. It was much more edgy.
which was great for the time. Yeah. So you, when you got signed and you did your first record with Steve Albini, and you did it in Pachyderm, right? Which is that place that's up in Minnesota, right? It's
Yeah, Cannon Falls, Minnesota.
yeah, which is like where In Utero was done with Nirvana, and of course Soul Asylum did Grave Dancers Union there. There were quite a few records that were done there.
Mm-hmm. After us, of course.
Yeah, after you.
No, that was Steve's find. He's the one who knew about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was all after, right? So it was all after. So like, let's talk about that. So were you guys? He found that, and you were the first band to record there, right, with him?
Yes, I believe second band. And actually, the record that he had done, the one record that he had done at Pachyderm for us, was out, and it was a really cool record. And I'm based on the name of the record, I think, was Sea Monsters. What was the name of the band?
And I'm trying to remember.
British band.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm trying to remember who that was. We know that.
They were cool. It was a cool record. And the really cool thing about that record is that you could really hear the ambience of that studio. Like Steve really likes to capture the room. And we were just like, yeah, that sounds great. So when he brought the idea of recording there.
I mean, how was the decision to work with him? Were you big Black fans, or did you just like, were you interested in some of the stuff that he was doing back in that period when Touch and Go and all that Chicago stuff was happening?
Yeah, I was into that, and I was into Big Black. But the funny thing is that the first time we talked on the phone, I was like, man, you've done a lot of different stuff and different kinds of stuff. I mean, all in the sort of indie rock or punk rock idiom, I guess, but like different styles. I just want you to know, like, these are my favorite, production-wise, my two favorite records that you've done recently in the last 4 years. And that was Jesus Lizard Goat.
Yeah.
And Breeder's Pod.
Yeah. Which had, that cover of Happiness is Warm Gun on it. Remember?
Oh, yeah.
That was a great cover. Yeah, it was cool.
And the Jesus Lizard record is still, that record holds up.
It is.
Time. I mean,
love that David Yow's out touring again and doing stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always love going to see those Jesus Lizard shows back in the day, which is cool. So it's your first record, right? So you're signed to Slash. Steve picks up the idea of doing Pachyderm. You guys go out, and it's a place it's out in the woods. But I mean, did you feel that was a great place for you to work because it was kind of getting away even from home and from Los Angeles? Did it feel like it was a great work atmosphere, an incubator for you guys to record? What was that feeling like when you got there?
I mean, it was our first time making a record, so everything seemed, like shiny and new and crazy, and like, so we're getting paid to do this. Like, this is crazy. So, but yeah, I mean, looking back, it's incredibly isolated. Like, we never left. Not once. So it was kind of, and the house itself, not the studio, it's like the studio building and then the house building, it was very sort of like 60s, 70s, McMansion-y sort of. It was weird. It had a weird vibe, but it had an inside ground level pool that we loved, and Steve loved it, and we swam in there like every night after recording. So it was cool. We got to know each other really well because that was it. It was like Steve had hired someone to come and actually like make meals for us and just leave them in the kitchen for us. So
cool, right? It was somebody local that he found. It was
someone that a friend of a friend, I think, that was in a band that was also a chef of some kind, and they lived for some reason not too far away from where the studio was, but it allowed us to spend the maximum amount of waking hours actually recording.
And creating, which is cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to finish Comfort?
Um, I want to say like somewhere around 16, 18 days.
Yeah.
Not long, not long. Like for us, like the amount of days was pre-calculated based on money and stuff. And it was, I didn't like that.
Yeah.
I wanted more time.
Yeah. Because that's the way you like to create, which is cool. So, all right. Well, I mean, let's go to the second album. Let's talk about Magnified because at this point, you've always been a guy who's liked to experiment with with equipment and production. And at this point, you were producing the record yourselves when it came down to Magnified. When you did that, I mean,
Sort of. It that ended up being the case in
would
the
you
end.
start with someone else? Like, were there
We
four?
did start with someone else who ended up quitting halfway through the recording of the record,
Yeah,
and and they over disagreements with me and Greg. Basically, it wasn't going well. I mean, we in the pre-production part, it seemed pretty cool, and once the recording started, we just had too many times where we were talking about sounds and different parts and what octaves to play certain things in, and he had a lot of opinions, and most of them were not syncing with ours. So it ended up being just kind of like a disagreement that we couldn't overcome, and he bailed. And then the funny thing is I think there was like 2 or 3 weeks where the label didn't know that the producer had quit, and we didn't tell him.
right.
So we just kept working, and we were just waiting for to get cut off, basically.
Yeah,
But then they came up to listen to some stuff, and they really liked what they heard, and they didn't really say anything about the producer. So we just finished it, and then we went and mixed it with David Bianco.
yeah. Dave,
Yeah, who just passed away sort of recently.
sorry to hear that. Yeah,
Yeah, that was another huge, like, working with Albini was a big learning experience for me.
yeah,
First time working in a proper recording studio, and watching someone work who has a definite style was really cool. And then working with Bianco on the mixes for Magnified was also really cool, because he was like a seasoned veteran, and he would just dig in there, and it was very fun communicating our thoughts to him and then hearing it come back.
yeah. So you felt good about that.
Yeah, we felt good about that.
Did you ever mention the other producer, or would you rather stay away from that?
I'd rather stay away from
Yeah,
that.
which I get totally. You know what I mean? Because it's not been documented. But it makes total sense because you have always had your vision, Ken, too. And with you and Greg, you knew what you wanted. So ultimately, it worked out that way. And the label was happy with the way that it came out, which was great. When they
Yeah, that was actually kind of complicated, because what really happened was Greg and I had demoed the album Magnified in its entirety with 4-track cassette machines,
yeah,
quite detailed for it only being 4 tracks. And when we presented those as like, here's our songs, our demos for the second album to Slash, they were very excited about them. In fact, Bob Biggs, the owner, was like, why don't we just release this? Why do we have to do a different recording? These are awesome. And to us, we did like most of the recording, but to us, the drum machine stuff that mostly Greg had programmed was like just placeholder for a real drummer to play. We just couldn't, because we weren't trying, like the drum machine stuff that we were programming was not drum machine type parts. And we didn't really see ourselves as an electronic band of any kind. We always envisioned the music to be played like a rock trio with a live drummer and have that feel and sound. So to us, it was kind of like, we like that they connected to the creativity that we had put into like the guitar sounds and stuff like that, but we couldn't get our heads around the demo-esque or the demo-ness of the drum machine. So we went ahead, recorded the whole album, turned it in, and we were like, what do you think? And Bob was like, I like the demos better. Like $50,000 later or something like that. Yeah. And he was just like, eh. And that was funny because that ended it. That meeting had an echo, like, maybe a year and a half later when we were done from the touring of Magnified. And we went to Bob and said, listen, this time, instead of even using any kind of producer, could we just like buy a bunch of like cool recording equipment and let us go make those 4-track demos that you liked, but we'll have 24 tracks this time.
Yeah.
And our manager was like, he's not going to go for it. And I was like, well, let's just try. You're probably right. And as soon as we said it, I was like 1 minute into the pitch to Bob, and he just was like, yep, all good. Give him the money later. I'm going to lunch.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, no pun intended, but you did some of it in Los Angeles, some in like Silver Lake, right? You did it, yet was all over, right? Where you worked on that record?
Fantastic Planet?
Yeah.
No, we rented a house. It's a bizarre story. We rented Lita Ford's first house that she had bought in Tahunga. You know where Tahunga is?
Yeah, I know where Tonga is, yeah.
Yeah, it's like La Crescenta, that sort of area.
And so you want to just tell me how Kelly ended up joining them? Because Kelly is, I mean, like that.
Kelly?
That completed the band for me. Like, I mean, look, I love the early records too, but Kelly was like, he was so great with you guys. You know what I mean? Playing with you and playing with Greg and playing with Troy. Like I just loved when he joined the band. You know what I mean?
Well, we went from being like an okay live unit to being a way better live act, I think, when Kelly joined the band. And the interesting thing about Kelly, because we're pretty hard on drummers in the studio when we're working with people, but the thing that was great or fortunate for Kelly is that he joined after the recording of Magnified, but for all the touring of Magnified, which was like 100 or 200 shows, I think. So when we went to go record Fantastic Planet with him, we already had a really strong connection with him, like musician-wise. We had a shorthand. We didn't have to, it wasn't like a new guy joining the band. He'd already been in the band for like a year and a half, played all these shows, tons of conversations about playing and parts, and so that really helped.
Yeah, it's amazing. So tell me about this house. We'll go back to it. So it's Lita Ford's house, first house she owned.
Yeah.
Right? Was this something she bought like in her Runaways, like later Runaways days, or when she was?
I think so.
In the hair, like when she like would Kiss Me Deadly and the stuff she did during the like her 80s. I wonder, but
I don't know exactly. But the strange thing was she left a lot of her personal things there, and that was weird to us because like we weren't the first renters. Like there was another band in before us. You probably remember Medicine, Brad Lehner's band.
Guys, yeah.
Yeah, that's how we found out about the house. And the reason they found out about the house is because they shared a business manager with Lita Ford.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was just bizarre.
It's like one of the first Airbnbs, right? We're like,
yeah.
We're all still there.
And for a band that was just getting into that new tech, like ADAT and Tascam digital 8-track technology.
Yeah.
It was a real boon in terms of like having more recording time with pretty close to the same quality of recording technology and gear.
Yeah.
In a house that you're paying $2,000 a month in rent instead of $2,000 a day to be in an A list, or even at that time, like B studios were getting $1,500, $1,600.
Yeah. And so it gave you the time to take your time to create all those things and all those cool interludes and segs that are on the record.
I mean, Ken, what I love is and we're going to talk about that too, is the new box set that's coming out, which is fantastic. I mean, available digitally, I know on vinyl, which is incredible too, but you went and remixed and remastered everything. But the testimonials are something that I've been talking about for years. Whenever I've been wanting to turn people on to the band and Fantastic Planet, and I would say to people, this is one of my favorite albums of the 90s, maybe one of my favorite albums ever. I love the record so much, but I would also explain to people how many other musicians and artists love the record with the same kind of passion that I had for it. You know what I mean? And so what I love about the liner notes and the booklet that's in this new collection that you have out from 92 to 96, Failure, is that you've got people in there talking about it. You've got, obviously Maynard, James Keenan, the Tool guys. You've had a long-term relationship with those guys, friendship, touring, all the other different things you've done together. He and I have had these conversations over dinner where we've talked about for hours about the band, about Failure. And he's in there. Chino is in there from the Deftones, and Sam from Interpol, and all those different people. It's great. You've got some interesting testimonials from all the people that are in these liner notes as well, and then talking about the making of those records. So I think it's really great that people get to see that, and that's not even everybody, because and Dean DeLeo's in there, my old Jersey brother from STP is in there.
Yeah.
But even the Pearl Jam guys from all these different bands, I've had these conversations. Kim Thiel from Soundgarden talked about this. We've talked about this record. Was that one of those things where you still? It's great to feel and know that how many other musicians that have really loved this record and have taken it to heart.
Oh, it's an amazing compliment, and it's kind of hard to believe sometimes, because some of the artists are like, I'm just like, wow, because I really respect almost all those artists in a huge way. So that part of it is just, it's just really, it's really affirming, especially when you are an act that, really hasn't had huge commercial success. It's definitely a nice thing to have that sort of angle to it. And it's also interesting because we're, normally a band's band, when I think of bands or whatever that people say, use that term, a lot of them are like really more like proggy bands, you know? You can play super fast, and that's a whole other universe that we don't really participate in. So it's kind of interesting to be one of these like more fringy bands that's, not super proggy at all. In fact, I'm not going to even try to nail that one down. But I feel like we've eked out a little slice of something.
Yeah.
Not sure what it is, but it's a cool feeling to have it recognized for sure.
I know, it's incredible. Were you excited when Maynard with A Perfect Circle decided to do The Nurse Who Loved Me and from the album, even though I know that wasn't your song, but were you guys excited? You're like, hey, this is great to see that. He's always been such a big fan of yours. Was that cool to have that covered?
It was amazing, especially when I heard the version. Because when somebody told me, he covered it, I was like so curious. Like, was it going to be like similar or far away? And then, of course, the version on the album is very far away. So I really respect and enjoy that version. He did do, or A Perfect Circle did do a little bit kind of more in between their version and our version when they played it live.
Yes.
Which was also cool. And I joined them on stage for that a few times. So yeah, it was really fun.
I mean, when you guys came back together for that weekend for Maynard's birthday, 50th birthday, and you guys in Perfect Circle and Puce Fur, that was a Failure fan's dream come true. Because a lot of people didn't get to see you. I did, of course, but a lot of people that became fans afterward never saw the band the first time around. You know what I mean? And it was just an incredible thing. It was very cool. And I want to also, I want to remind people that are watching us that this incredible box set is out. It's coming out, right? Is it out now? Is it available?
It's out, and actually, to be truthful, I'm pretty sure that the vinyl is already sold out.
It probably is because,
Yeah.
by the way, when I was trying to look for some vinyl that I saw the Fantastic Planet vinyl on the wall for like $250 at Amoeba. You know what I mean? And I'm like, wow. I go, I made, before you guys reissued it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And I remember just looking at it going, I really like that, but I may have to wait on that one for the price. But,
definitely wait.
Yeah,
definitely wait.
Amazing. But, we also, you and I talked about, we were in touch, and I, remember when I loved the Replicants. Replicants record was so cool. And, you working with the guys in Tool and all of you getting together. And I remember I was telling you that I was talking to Gary Newman about your cover of Our Friends Electric and how much he said it was one of his favorites, if not his favorite cover of the record. He thought it was the best because, it's been done by a lot of people, right? So, Weezer covered it. Dead Weather covered it. I know Courtney Love said she wanted to cover it.
Yeah.
She said to me, "Oh, it's the greatest song of all time without a chorus." I'm like,
yeah.
Well, so, and your version is so powerful. It's like, I remember the first time I heard that song, and it blew my mind. Like, when I was in Florida, I was in like Clearwater, Florida, and a radio station in between Molly Hatchet and Skinner and stuff. All of a sudden, this song comes on, and I go, "What the fuck? This is the greatest thing ever!"
Yeah.
And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I got all the way back to New Jersey and went to the record store and found it, the album Replicas. And
that's right.
It was very life-changing. So then I saw Gary live, Pleasure Principle Tour. They called it the Touring Principle in 1980. And then a year later for Telecon, I went to see him twice.
Yeah.
And they were just so great. But, I loved it. First of all, I knew you were a fan of his when I saw you had named the band Replicants.
Yeah, so, of course. Huge fan and huge influence on me personally. Probably more than the other guys, two guys in Failure. Yeah, I know all of this way.
Tell me about, so when did you discover him? Probably, same.
When I'm pretty sure 91X.
Yeah.
In San Diego, in high school, probably was 16 or 17 or something like that. And it was probably Cars, but then, most of my friends weren't really digging too deep on albums. They were just, into the radio, but I found all of his prior work and just got really, I went deep on that stuff. So yeah, when we ended up just jamming together in a rehearsal space, I had just listened to that song driving over, and Paul DeMora was in there and Greg was in there, and I think Chris was in there, and we were, "What do you guys want to play?" And I was like, "I know what I want to play." And I think that was the first song that little, group of people actually played something.
Yeah, which is amazing because that's supposedly, oddly enough, that's a story about the Dead Weather when they were trying to figure out what to play together. That's what they said. That they're like, "Oh, let's try Our Friends Electric," and then they just released it as a B-side of "Treat Me Like Your Mother," which was, but it's one of those songs that's just so special. It was so different at the time, and but I love it because it set a precedent for what you were doing with that covers album, and the versions on there were just so cool and different. I mean, that song in its own way was a pretty true tribute to the original, right? But if you take something like Destination Unknown, that's like completely
whole different thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Which was great because it was like, wow, this is nothing like the original. This takes it in such a different, darker direction. Tell me about when
we didn't have any kind of overarching plan. What had happened is we had made a few of these demos in that rehearsal space I was just mentioning, the four of us, who were in different bands. So it was more of just fun. We were bringing a couple 6-packs and just I think I had started to buy some of the equipment for Failure that we ended up using at Lita's house later for Fantastic Planet. But this was a rehearsal space, so it was kind of down and dirty. And we went in there and we're just having fun. And I was like practicing recording. Ended up, I remember Paul saying, "I want a cassette of what we did tonight." And I was like, "Okay, I'll drop by tomorrow." And somehow that cassette ended up in Matt Marshall's hands, who was Tool's
The
A&R
guy, right?
Yeah,
Matt's a good guy. Matt's a friend of mine too, and yeah, I mean, he worked at Zoo, you know what I mean, and then RCA, and now he's over at Concord. But it's yeah, that's great that he decided to put that record out, because I love that you guys decided to do it. So, you know, paying tribute to a lot of great records from that era that we're talking about. Even doing the Cars, just what I needed, which was another one of those life-changing songs. I remember the first time I heard it when it was brand new, and I went, "What the fuck is this?" And I was and obviously right away and wanted. It was like Our Friends Electric. It was you know, just what I needed, being the first single from the Cars debut album, was just blew my mind the first time I heard it. I remember exactly where I was driving as a teenager in the car when it came on the radio. Like, you know, it's one of those things you have to.
You'll never forget it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So cool.
But like, to do a song like Silly Love Songs with Maynard, right? You guys do that with Maynard from Tool. And it's kind of one of those songs that a lot of people have thought was always one of the, you know, I mean, obviously Paul McCartney's Paul McCartney, and he's done so many great things, but Silly Love Songs is considered one of his, you know, more lightweight songs, right? But you guys, again, took that in a different direction. How did that come up? Like, let's do this McCartney song, which was actually from like 76, 77.
I'll tell you how it happened. It happened that, you know, Matt said, "Stay in the house and make the Replicants record. Here's some money." And so, and he said, you know, Maynard's going to sing on a track or two. And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Awesome." And so sure enough, like maybe, I don't know, a month later, Maynard was up at the house. But before he came up, he called me. He's like, "So what am I going to do?" And I was like, "Well, here's some songs that we're thinking about trying to do something with." And Silly Love Songs was on that list. And when I remember I said that name, and he just like snickered on the phone. He was like,
yeah.
He's like, I'm like, "What?" He's like, "I have an idea for that one."
Well, he probably was thinking, "I'd rather do Jet, but you know, but if I'm going to do something like Silly Love Song," right?
No, I just think he's always looking for the, you know, contrarian path in pretty much everything, right? So like, he was like, "Silly Love Songs, I know that song. Let's just go, like, you know, more than the opposite." It was like a complete retake on it, and we slowed it way down. And that's the one that it's almost hard to recognize the connection to the original. Record.
It's amazing when you think about that. You know, it's and then in that way, I guess when he did the third Perfect Circle album, Emotive, because I went up to his house in Jerome, Arizona, and did like all the interview, visual and audio, for the rest of the world, for when he did the whole covers album, and almost takes the concept of what you did with Silly Love Song and does an entire album with the cool version way he did Imagine, and you know Billy Howard singing Freedom of Choice and different things that were on that record. It was very, very cool.
Very cool.
You know, let's get back to Failure. I mean, well, you know, we've talked about all these. I mean, I look at your productions, the things you've done, you know, with Nine Inch Nails, even Pete Yorn and Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. There's just so many different people that you've worked with. I've loved a lot of your production. I always wanted to ask you, because you were involved in the production of the Chris Cornell Casino Royale, You Know My Name. Mm-hmm. Right, which is a great track, and you know, obviously we miss Chris so much, you know. But I want to know how that came about. You ended up working on that track.
I'm friends with Leah Volek at Sony, who like oversees music in the films over there.
Sony Pictures.
Sony Pictures, yeah. And I guess Chris had already written the song and recorded it in England, I think.
Yeah.
And he wasn't happy with his vocal performance.
Yeah.
And he just wanted another shot at it, but he didn't want to fly all the way back to England. So, you know, Leah called me up and was just like, "Hey, I need some help. Can you redo a vocal for this James Bond song, and I was like, well, who's singing it? And she was like, Chris Cornell, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm a huge fan. And I think it was that same day. I think it was like 2 hours later, Chris is pulling up to my house, and yeah, he knocked it out in like an hour or so, just kind of taking a couple passes at it, talking about it a little bit, and he kind of wanted to just lay back the timing a little bit.
Yeah.
Felt it was a little too on top. But his microphone technique really freaked me out.
Tell me.
He brought his own mic, which is like an SM7, the DJ mic, right? A lot of people are into that mic, but like, it's kind of one of those mics that you don't need to use a whole lot of microphone technique on,
right?
Because you're meant to be close. You're meant to be right on it. That's the design of it. So I'm watching the meters and dialing in his, compression level or whatever, and it's all looks good, sounds good. And then he goes really loud, and I'm like, usually I will ride the microphone preamp with really powerful singers. I'll write it down so it doesn't clip when I'm recording, right? So you kind of just, if you're recording someone for the first time or the first time on a song, usually have your hand on the mic pre-gain just in case they go somewhere you didn't expect, volume-wise.
Yeah.
And I already knew the song because I had heard it, so I knew he was going to go loud. And I'm waiting for the level to change. He does go down. I'm waiting for the level to change. The level doesn't really change. I look over. He's got the mic like on the floor, like by his feet. And he's just like yelling in this vocal booth.
Yeah.
He was the loudest singer I've ever heard. I mean, his power was crazy. And he just was working that mic the whole time. And you don't hear it though in the final, which is the point, right?
Yeah. Like you don't hear the movement. You feel it's all even, and right?
It's all even. He's like mixing it for you, basically.
Which is amazing. Like on the floor in the booth.
Yeah, he was just like holding it way down here, and it's just like, yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I was what?
That's great.
I'd never seen someone do that in a recording studio.
I mean, he was truly one of the greatest singers of our generation, right? I mean, or any. I mean, what an incredible guy, right? I mean,
yeah.
And you enjoyed working.
Super sweet too.
Yeah, that's great. And talk about working with Pete Yorn, because you did you do the whole Day I Forgot album and stuff on the first record too, right?
No. My let's see. I think the only thing I have on the first album is For Nancy. That song.
Yeah, Strange Condition, the remake. I think you did. No, I think
maybe I did that. A different version of that song.
Yeah.
I think, and then on His Day I Forgot was the second record, right?
Yeah.
And I think I did like 3 or 4 songs on that.
Yeah.
And one of the singles, and then there was also another song, and I can't remember if it's on that record or if it was separate, that was on Spider-Man soundtrack.
Yeah, I love that Crystal Village song. That was great on there. I think you did that. But I want to say, but we're talking about working with 9 Inch Nails too and Trent, because you guys both have an incredible. I mean, you both have real visions when it comes to writing and recording. What was that experience like with you and 9 Inch Nails?
Super cool. I mean, it was one of those things where his normal guy was not available that he wanted to use, and so he was just kind of polling the band members. And I happened to at that point in the band, I happened to be friends with like 2 or 3 of the band members. So yeah, I think separately he'd heard my name maybe 2 times. He was like, "Well, who's this guy?" So I came down. He showed this was just for a live performance.
Yeah,
he wanted a really slammy mix of his rehearsal essentially, but it wasn't really a rehearsal. They were ready to do a show. And they had all their sounds dialed in, and it was, I'd often, as a fan and also a musician, I'd often wondered exactly how they were doing everything live, who was playing what machines were they using. So for me, it was an amazing educational experience to see how Trent was laying it all out, and to really dig into those multi-tracks. It was really fun.
Yeah, that must have been a good time though. And but I mean, in Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, you were working with them. Who were some?
Yeah.
What were some of your? When you look at some of the productions you've done, because you've done so many people have used you over the years. What are some of your favorites that you worked
on? Some. It's funny. There's a couple records. I don't know if I would call this record my favorite, but there's a record. I'm going to have to send it to you.
Yeah, I love it.
Did you ever hear of this band called The Emergency?
Yeah, I have heard of them, of course. Yeah.
Okay, because I don't know if you've heard of this one. There might be more than one, but there was one that existed for like maybe even less than a year. It got John Rubely signed it to Atlantic.
Yeah.
And I got the nod to produce and mix it. And this is one of my favorite records that I've ever worked on, and it never came out.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was partly, I don't know the whole story, to be honest. I think there was some friction within the band. The singer was a bit of a madman. So I don't know. But it was like, I felt like it was one of those moments where I was capturing when I was recording them.
Yeah.
Because I recorded them as a band. They played together, and the singer like sang live.
Yeah.
And he was performing, and it was one of those moments where it's like, I'm really capturing like something magical here. So I was really bummed that didn't come out. I should probably just like find that album and leak it on the internet or something.
Yeah, you definitely should hear it. And by the way, thanks for coming up with you've come up with a lot of things I love, but one of my favorite album titles is "In the Future." Your body will be the furthest thing from your mind.
Yeah.
And there's always been there's interestingly futuristic and sci-fi and space rock. There's been all those elements in so many things. Tell me about that title.
That is 100% Greg Edwards.
Oh, it is?
Oh yeah, completely.
Great.
Yeah, no, he also titled The Hardest Monster as well.
Yeah.
He's into titles. As the history of the band has evolved from the very beginning, from Comfort to now we're working on hopefully what will become our sixth album. Yeah. Greg has gone from writing none of the lyrics to a majority of the lyrics.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, it's just something that has progressed for him. It's just like one of those things where it's like, yeah, we can both write lyrics, but if somebody's got some really great ideas and some great lyrics, why compete with that?
Yeah.
It's like embrace it and get into it. So, I mean, the collaboration that we have in the music part is also, kind of echoed in the lyric part of it, where it's like, if somebody's got the vision for it, go. Like right now, for instance, we're working on a song where I demoed it up. I like my vocal melody, and I like a few of the lyrics, but the rest of it I don't like, and I'm waiting for him to rewrite them.
Really? So, I'm thinking to myself, but you've always been a great lyricist too, so I never realized how that was that transition was happening. But you and Greg were both writing from the, if you go back to Comfort, you guys almost had an even amount of songwriting credit though on that record.
Well, we've always just kind of split things, because I think we've just kind of felt like, well, yeah, sure, someone brings in one song and the other person brings in a different song, but rather than, having to hash it out every time, let's just split it, and that way we don't have to worry about it or even, have any discussions about it. And it's actually, I think that decision has kind of served us pretty well.
It certainly has.
I mean, it's one of the, because there's enough to argue about in the studio, you know, when you've got two people that have, you know, strong creative ideas about things. It's like, let's keep it to those creative choices.
Absolutely. I think it's great. Now, Ken, I ask you to do what we always do on the show, and only place, and it's pick 7 of your favorite albums or albums that have been very inspirational to you. And the albums that you picked were all in those years, you know, where they would be so, you know, just impactful and a blueprint. From 80 to 84 is all the records that you picked. And the first one you picked I'd like to talk about right now is David Bowie's Scary Monsters.
Yeah.
You know, that record's incredible. The title track and Ashes to Ashes Fashion. It's No Game Part 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Why you love that record and what's special about it to you?
Well, I was a fan of Bowie before that, but when that record came out, he kind of, like, to me, was really opening the door on a more kind of noisier, experimental side of his, you know, his songwriting or his studio approach, and especially the guitars and the guitar parts that were happening on that record really had an impact on me, because they were like lots of space. Sometimes there wouldn't be any playing, and then just like a really weird slash of dissonance, and the sounds that the guitarists were using, which I think were Alomar and Fripp, right?
Yeah, they were, yeah.
Yeah, those were the two, I think, main guitarists on that record. And they were also just kind of peaking as studio musicians.
Yeah,
and they were, you could just tell, like, from the guitar and the overall aesthetic of that record, they were trying stuff.
Yeah.
They weren't being satisfied with just like making a good album. They were going for something kind of new and kind of edgy.
You know, they were. It was interesting. That was a period for Fripp that was pretty interesting, because he had done his Exposure album where he had Daryl Hall come in and sing on a track that he had only listened to one time called You Burn Me Up, I'm a Cigarette. And he basically told him, just do it. I'm going to play for you once, then I want you to record right afterwards and sing it. And that was this Fripp experimentation he did with Daryl Hall. But you know what Fripp told me about recording Fashion is that they were like, you know, they were basically staying there at the studio where they were recording, and he was sleeping like in a bunk. And that David woke him up and said, "Nah, I want you to come in and play, and just play whatever." Like he had not really ever heard the backing track at that point. He was waiting. And so Fripp literally went in there and played that and all the other crazy stuff that he played on Fashion. That was just a first take, which is a great story, you know?
Yeah. And they probably, he was probably like, okay, let me do that again. And they were probably like, no, like that was awesome.
It's perfect. Yeah. Which is such a great one. You know, and you have that in common. You know, it's, I remember sitting with Bowie and Trent Reznor and talking to him and Trent telling me the story about how how he discovered Bowie, which is so funny, in front of Bowie, saying that he had gotten Scary Monsters through the Columbia RCA Record Club.
Oh, yeah.
Forgot to sign the thing that you send back in when you don't want the record. And it just came. You went, oh, shit, I guess I got to buy this one.
Oh, wow.
He listened to Scary Monsters, Trent, and then became a huge Bowie fan and was very influential. But that's funny, isn't it? But what a great record. All right. Yeah. So the next record you picked is another great one, man. And God, do I love those first three albums by these guys. And you could see them growing at a very fast pace. And it was the Police, who were such an incredible trio. And you picked Zenyatta Mondatta, also from 1980. I mean, the first album was made in 78, Outlandos de Moore, and Regatta de Blanc in 79. And this record, it's amazing because they tell the story about how originally they weren't happy with the mix. It was rushed so fast. So they went, oh, wait a minute. And
I love. There's something great about driven to tears into when the world is running down. You make the best of what's still around. Tell
That
me,
edit, that tape edit, you can hear it.
yeah, you can hear it actually, but
Yeah.
tell me why you love that record.
I just thought I was a fan of the records before that, but I think they really hit their stride there. There's sort of a relaxed feeling to some of the stuff, and they're settling into their sound.
Yeah.
And that song in particular, which was, I don't know if it was a single or one of the real hits from the record, but When the World is Running Down, I always just loved the mood of that song because it was so subdued in a way.
Yeah.
It wasn't so like hit you over the head catchy. It was more of like a mood piece in a way.
Yeah, and radio played it back then. You remember it?
They did play it. They did play it some, yeah. So I don't know. That song just made a big impact on me. I ended up doing a cover of it on one of my solo records, actually.
Which is very cool. And what a great song to do. And they were so good live, even from the very beginning.
I never got to see them live. I'm so bummed.
Well, maybe you never know. Maybe, I mean, Sting is the one who always tries to not do it, but you never know. It could. Who knows? Maybe they'll do it again one day. But I can say, the first time I saw him, it was for $2 at the Lone Theater in Philadelphia. And I tell this story because it's in my book too. But I tell the story about how the guy at the Ticketron, which became Ticketmaster, where you go to like a record store or a luncheonette to buy, concert tickets, said to me and my friend, he goes, "Oh, this band of Police. Yeah, you better enjoy them now because they're going nowhere." Isn't that amazing? And he sold for $2, and they did Can't Stand Losing You Twice because they didn't have enough songs.
Yeah, I've heard a recording of that tour.
And it's great,
Yeah. It sounds like they played some really small, really tight places.
Yeah, and it was it was such an amazing, amazing thing. That weekend the next night it was Joe Jackson Look Sharp, and Saturday night was Police Thursday, Joe Jackson Friday, and Saturday at the Princeton Gym, Elvis Costello and the Attractions, This Year's Model. What a fucking weekend.
Wow.
78, and I'm a teenage kid. It was incredible. So,
amazing.
Just amazing time. Speaking of great records from back then, the third one that you picked is a great album from Susie and the Banshees from 1981, Juju. And I loved that 1-2 punch. I mean, of course, there were two albums before it, but I loved Kaleidoscope and Juju. Those records were incredible. Christine was the first song that I heard from Kaleidoscope and just fell in love with it. What is this? And then Juju took it to a whole new level with Spellbound, Arabian Nights, and Monitor, and that stuff. Talk to me about your love for that record.
That was happening around the same time as I was discovering The Cure, and ultimately Robert Smith actually played with Susie, I think, for an album or something, or a tour. So there was a sort of shared vibe there, but I got the chance to see Susie around that time live a couple times. So that record and seeing her live and hearing that band live was just made a big, big impact on me. Because for me, it was a sort of a turning point where I was like getting into those kind of like, I don't know, what do you want to call it, gothy type sound, but it was more than just the goth or dark aspect of it. It was like, they were actually doing some really advanced musical shit. I mean, like some of their chord voicings and rhythms, like Budgie on what he would do with drums in that band was like really advanced and kind of forward thinking for a on the surface just a rock band. So hearing that level of like thought and innovation in that album specifically really had a huge impact on me.
Yeah, I love that. And
I mean, you can listen to some of my guitar stuff on Comfort and draw a straight line to that record.
Yeah, I mean, John McCosh, he was such a great player.
Yeah,
drummer, everybody, in that band.
And now the Cure, obviously, they had their thing that they did together as well, and they were always so close, and it made total sense. And it's interesting you picked two different Cure albums, which I love the fact that they're not, some of the most popular albums, but at the same time, when Pornography came out after the first three, after after Three Imaginary Boys, which in this country was called Boys Don't Cry, it was a domestic release, and then you had obviously 17 Seconds, which was the first time I saw the Cure live. I saw them do that, and then the third album, Faith. Pornography had taken them in a totally even darker direction. With A Strange Day and 100 Years, all those songs on there. Tell me why you love that record and how that affected you.
Well, that record is just so dramatic and so dark and so extreme in the kind of emotional content and mood of it that it really just kind of hit me over the head. But then it has this other level of like really kind of extremely interesting craft going on in the production of that record. That record is almost all the drums are actually drum machine, but they sort of have this feeling of being played, or it sort of sounds like a drummer in a studio. And part of the reason for that is, at least on a number of the songs, it was a drum machine, but they were piped the individual outputs of the drum machine into like whatever PA speakers and guitar amps they could find, and put those in the live room, and then mic'd and recorded that. They didn't record the direct outputs of the drum machine, which was a pretty interesting kind of thing. And it really,
you can hear it.
You can hear it.
Yeah, and Hanging Garden, it's so weird. It definitely feels like, you listen to songs like that, right? Like Hanging Garden, and you're like, whoa. It just sounds like it's like some guys that, it could have been recorded outside. I mean, there's something,
it sounds organic, but it's actually a machine. And there's a kind of aggression and kind of violence to some of those drum parts that just really, I hadn't heard that technique before. And combined with the kind of crazy voicings that he was using on guitar, it was just a very, very kind of new sound to me. I was familiar with their other records, but when I heard that record, I was like, wow, it's so striking. And again, that's probably one of the most influential records on my guitar playing, for sure.
Yeah, so good. It really is. And then you picked, after Pornography, they took this 3-single break, which, people that didn't know that they were coming out in the order they were. And I interviewed them when The Walk came out, the second in that series of singles. But it went Let's Go to Bed, The Walk, and The Love Cats. And that became, Japanese Whispers as an album collection. And that was like they'd gone so far with Pornography that they decided to do things that were like a little more like in mainstream.
More singles.
Yeah, more singles, not so much mainstream. But then The Top came out with Caterpillar and different things on there, Shake Dog Shake. And you love this record, The Top too. Again, another record, from '84, right? And it was, looking at that, it's, Give Me It was one of your favorite songs on this record.
It's just so, again, it's similar in a way to Pornography, but it has a little bit more depth to it in terms of the different kinds of songs. Some songs aren't so dark. There's a lightness to some of the songs, and there's a kind of whimsical thing that's not really in Pornography. But there's an overall just like identity to that record that is not shared with any of his other records. I don't think there's a sound to it. There's a lot of Middle Eastern instruments he's using in there. And again, it's just like this record where he's just created this like universe, and it's unique. Like there's nothing really around it. You go into it and you can kind of live there.
Oh, you absolutely can. It's again, I love their experimenting with sounds and the different things that they created at that period of time. Never afraid to make a move.
ever.
And his vocal too, like he's just getting really confident with his sort of like blue notes that aren't really in the key of the song, but they're so expressive. Like he's just really, he's on it, as a composer and a singer, I think, during that period. Although it's very, very dark, so I don't know really what was going on in his life, but
yeah, I think he's really great. I think he's a great creator of story because he's been able to maintain this. I mean, look at their amazing amount of their catalog and work, all of the massive amount, and they're working on that new record right now, which is pretty amazing. It's almost done. Let's talk about Rush Moving Pictures. And Camera's Eye. I mean, look, it's interesting. Somebody just released, because they're doing a tribute to Neil Peart of Modern Drummer magazine, put this thing together with a ton of drummers. It's a pay-per-view live event, and obviously, some of those records I saw are great, and I saw Rush for a Farewell to Kings tour, but my favorite album was Fly By Night because it was the first one that I really discovered. It was Neil Peart's first record, and I saw a listing recently that listed the album that you picked as their number one album of all time, and picked 2112 as number two, which was that concept album, which was literally their fourth record, and Fly By Night they listed as number three, which I was very happy about the placing of that. But Moving Pictures inspired so many people and love that record. And one of the songs that you love on that is Camera Eye. The Camera. Talk to me about that.
Well, I mean, I like the whole record. I mean, so much has been written, and I mean, we've all heard the big hits on that record so many times. They're just like a part of culture. But that song in particular, I think, really gripped me because of the arrangement. You've got this sort of, and the way they build tension. I've had a kind of strange, somewhat ambivalent relationship with like prog type music in my whole musician life, basically. Like my brother was, that's where this comes from, basically. He was a huge Rush fan, and he was quite a good guitar player and could actually play along with almost all of their songs.
Like Alex Lifeson, he had their...
Yeah, I mean, and so Alex Lifeson for me is spitting like he's just there. He's just in my head because I've just heard his playing so much. And that record and that song in particular, I don't know. There's a chain in them, like maybe 2/3 of the way in that song where they come back to the sort of main motif, but they've changed the key.
Yes.
And it's just an incredible moment. It's just, I don't know. It's just every time it never gets old for me. Every time that part comes, I'm always just like, I wish I would have written that. I mean, oh my God.
I know, it's so great. I mean, they made some incredible records, and that was a very sad loss we had this past year.
Oh yeah.
When we lost Neil. And the last record that you picked of the 7 that were very influential on, I know there's, it's such a hard thing for me to ask artists. 7 records is like, I know that's just scratching the surface, but it's a great one that you picked because it happens to me, it's my favorite Cocteau Twins album. It's the album Treasure. Love that record, the 4AD band. And, I always loved the first time I remember I heard that song, Evo, which, I mean, some people might think it's called Ivo because Ivo is the guy involved in their record label, 4AD. But she's singing Evo to me when I hear that song. And I love the atmosphere in that record.
That record is just dripping in beauty and depth and emotion. That record is so powerful. For being a record that is, like sonically kind of light, I mean, I wouldn't say light, but like it's not a hard rock experience at all.
Right.
But the power of the emotion is so heavy and so I don't know, profound.
Yeah, it sounds like Lorelei too, right? Which is
that's the one for me where I was just like, wow. I mean, Robin Guthrie's guitar sounds in that era of Cocteau Twins, he was just going off.
I know. And Elizabeth Fraser, her voice, the way it's layered in that record too, is so beautiful for me.
Well, that's the thing about a lot of their records, but especially that record, the layering of almost all the instruments is just, I'd never heard that before. I think he took the studio and the layering of like different, slightly different guitar tones, but layering them on top of each other. He kind of took that to a whole new place.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, like ambient guitar sounds.
He really did. And then, you know, when I was talking about the song Evo, when it gets towards the end and there's the instrumental break, it sounds like walking through a rainstorm. You know what I mean? It literally does. You're listening and you're going, wow. I mean, you're just in the center of sound. It's a beautiful thing, right?
Such a beautiful record.
Yeah.
It's one of those, to me, kind of perfect records.
It is.
Know? It just works top to bottom.
Yeah, it is a great one. And for people watching us, they should definitely check that record out. It's one of my favorites. I love that. It's one of those things that I've always had to replace. You know what I mean? I had a vinyl originally on 4AD and then an older CD, and then I bought it when it was finally reissued in America. I had to somebody took mine. I think I lent it to someone, as you do. You know, you lend your friend something. You got to check this out, and then you don't see it again. But hey, you always find a way back to it. Ken, you know, I want to thank you for taking the time today. You know, I mean, I really enjoyed having you on, man. It's always great catching up with you. Do you
Likewise, Matt. Really, really good to hang with you.
You know, and you know, it's funny, Ken, I think you were when I moved to LA the first time in 2000, you were my first phone call. I remember when
I remember that. Yeah.
You know, I was like, Ken, hey man, I moved to LA. And I gave you a call because it was just, I was excited that I was going to be on the same coast with you. I'd moved here to do the Farm Club show, and I was living at the Oakwoods, and yes, I remember. But
that's right.
Reaching out to you that first night when I landed.
I think I had just moved to Studio City at the time. Yeah. So you were nearby. Yeah, that was the Oakwoods.
Isn't it? You know, quite the history. Besides, you know, besides being on Jay Leno, where they would like knock on people's apartment doors all those years, and then, you know, all the child stars, the kids that would come to audition for all the, you know, there's a big documentary. It's about the Oakwoods that came out a few years ago.
No, I didn't know that. Wow.
And I remember.
I'll have to check that.
It's a funny story. When Maynard was mixing A Perfect Circle, Mère de Noms, he picked me up and we went to dinner, and then he brought me to the studio while they were mixing like some tracks, and then he dropped me off at the Oakwoods. And when Maynard and I pulled up in front of my building there were a whole bunch of coyotes in front of it.
Oh, wow.
Maynard,
a pack.
Yeah, there was a pack, and Maynard goes, "You want to stay in the car for a little bit?" I'm like, "Yeah, I guess we'll hang out." So we got in Maynard's car. You know, we thought it was the safest thing. You know, I mean, generally they're pretty cool with humans, but you never know. So
yeah, especially if they're in a pack. Yeah,
in a pack. Yeah, it's a little bit to worry about. Ken, thanks so much for doing this today, man. It was great, and we look forward to the next Failure record. I think it's gonna be great. You know, awesome. Do you think there'll be a reprint of, or is that going to be a one-time run of 92 to 96? The vinyl.
I'm not. It's something we're discussing.
Yeah.
I think there might be the two things we're weighing are, do the box set again, or should we make those individual albums available separately
with the new mixes, right? Which is really cool as well. I do love that, you know. And now we can change around some of the packaging or booklets, or, you know, inner sleeve, do some different things.
It was just so long and hard to get this box set done during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, there were some manufacturing issues originally, right?
Oh yeah, because I mean, we had delivered it essentially in mid-February. And so right when all of that was hitting and all the businesses were shutting down, and it was so hard to get anyone on the phone, and it was just, you know, we couldn't really foresee that. That was a tough one.
Yeah, it was crazy. Well, I'm glad it finally got out.
It's finally shipping now, and people seem to be pretty happy with it. So, yeah.
Well, Ken, it's great to talk to you, man. I'm glad your children are doing great. And say hello to Kelly and Greg and everybody for me. And you know. But it was so awesome to do this with you today, man. Wasn't it cool?
Awesome. Yeah, totally enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Thank you, Matt.
It was great, Ken. Thanks so much for doing it. I appreciate it.
Cool.
And we'll see you soon. We'll
Okay.
let you know, of course, when those individual records come out, if they do or gets reprinted. And we'll be talking to Ken again when the next Failure record comes out. This has been In a Lonely Place. I'm Matt Pinfield. I want to thank Ken Andrews, and I will be back with you soon. Thanks so much for watching.